Welcome back. Chapter 3. Virgil spent the afternoon reviewing Train's work. The room was cool and damp and smelled like paper and floor wax. He got up a few times to walk and think, wandering over the government building. A few people stopped to peer into the office, checking the guy with the blue t-shirt. Train asked, "How are you doing?" A couple of times, and he said, "Good. You're a good reporter." And she was. And she went away, possibly mollified, possibly to pee. Her reports were chronological rather than ordered by subject matter, so Virgil made notes on yellow legal pad organized by subject. There was one picture of the murdered victim, Professor Bartholomew Quill, when he was alive. An informal portrait in his laboratory that looked like it might have been taken by a newspaper reporter. It had a newsy look. Judging from a door behind Quill's shoulder, he was a tall man over 6 feet. He had neatly trimmed hair, originally light brown or blonde, now shot through with gray, and a full head of it. The short hair framed a sober oval face punctured with his thin blonde eyebrows and sharp blue-gray eyes that said, "I went to a private boys' school and then off to an Ivy League." The face of a high-level federal prosecutor or naval officer. The file also included a couple of dozen digital prints of the body as it was found, as well as close-ups of the entire corral and the area around it. The blood from the head wound appeared black against the fair hair, both at the site and where it trickled down Quill's skull and left a stain on the stone tile floor beneath his chin. He was wearing gray slacks, a gray shirt, and a black sports coat. The ensemble lent him the aspects of a vampire, especially since his lips were pulled back in a death grimace, revealing a long eye tooth. Train had interviewed more than 50 persons who'd known Quill, including his estranged current wife, 2 ex-wives, 2 ex-lovers, all the lab employees, colleagues at the university, and the neighbors, and a group of academics with whom he was feuding. She'd extracted from them narratives of their relationship to the dead man and accountings of their whereabouts on Friday and Saturday. The academic feud had taken quite a bit of Train's time. She'd conducted interviews with both Quill's supporters and Quill's haters, and there had been some violence involved. Train had had trouble determining the victim's exact time of death because he'd been known to take solitary walks around campus. Quill left his lab alone at 1 o'clock Friday afternoon and hadn't returned. He hadn't showed up on Monday either, which was unusual, but not unprecedented. His laboratory director had tried to call him twice on Monday, but Quill's phone had apparently been turned off. That also was not unusual. Famously, he hated being interrupted by an idiot who can poke a number into a keypad. Because Train hadn't a time of death, the medical examiner pegged it as being between Friday evening and noon Saturday. She'd been unable to eliminate alibis of the people closest to Quill or those who'd been involved with Quill in the feud, a vicious campus controversy concerning the relationship of medicine to culture. Quill had an office and a lab in Moore's Tower, a research center on campus. He would spend mornings there, arriving around 8 o'clock after a stop at Starbucks, where he picked up coffee and a slice of banana or pumpkin bread, which he ate at his desk. The next few hours were spent conferring with his senior lab assistants and reviewing ongoing work. In the afternoons, he often left the lab to walk and think, sometimes returning to work on into the evening on scientific papers. The lab's work had been published in all the major medical journals concerned with spinal injuries. Train noted that Quill's assistants called him either Barth, not Bart, or Dr. Quill. He had a medical degree, but had never used it to practice. He also had a PhD in biomedicine and had done advanced work in biorobotics. After leaving the lab on Friday, Quill had met with a professor of microsurgery and a professor of radiology at the University Medical Center. That meeting had lasted until about 3 o'clock. He'd been sighted by 2 medical students at Kaufman Memorial Union around 3 o'clock at the coffee bar and may have been sighted by 2 neighbors walking near his home around 5 o'clock, but that was uncertain. According to Tran's report, Quill lived alone in a large red brick house on East River Parkway within long walking distance of his lab. In good weather, he often walked and occasionally biked to the university. If he actually been spotted by the neighbors, that was the last time he'd been seen alive by any witnesses Train had been able to locate. Quill's estranged wife lived in a condo owned by Quill east of the university. At the time of his death, they were negotiating the terms of a divorce. There was a severe prenuptial agreement. Interestingly, the estranged wife would get little of Quill's money and no alimony at all if they divorced while he was alive, but would inherit a substantial fortune if he predeceased her. Very suspect. Virgil said, but noted that the wife had an ironclad alibi. She was also an academic and had been in Cleveland attending a conference on the structure of natural languages. That didn't mean she couldn't have had an accomplice to do the killing. The will, actually, a revocable trust, dictated precisely what would happen with Quill's estate when he died. Other than his estranged wife, nobody would get more or less if Quill were killed yesterday or 30 years later, but most would get it sooner if he were killed yesterday. His daughter was an exception. Under the terms of the trust, she was to be paid $60,000 a year until she was 30, the money intended to cover her education. After age 30, she wouldn't get another nickel, ever. Since she was already getting the payments from the trust, it made no financial difference to her when or whether Quill died. Train had gone to Verizon, Quill's phone service provider, and had extracted a record of where the phone had been. The phone had been turned off around 6 o'clock on Friday night, but Verizon's automated system had continued to track it until midnight. Quill had been around his house and neighbors until about 9:30 when he driven to an area known as Dickeytown. He left his car in a private parking lot and never gone back to it. After leaving the car, he wandered around on foot with no protracted stops. Then the phone traced a walk across the campus and then across a footbridge over the Mississippi. At midnight, the phone had been turned back on in the library, but then 10 minutes later, again outside the library, it had disappeared altogether. At 6 o'clock the next morning, it popped up again on the footbridge between the east and west bank of the river. A Google search had been made of Starbucks, perhaps to check opening times. The phone then carried to the library, which didn't open until 8, had been turned off again there, was tracked for a few more minutes, then disappeared again. It hadn't yet reappeared on Verizon's records or been found. You're telling me that he was killed Saturday morning before the library opened? He must have had a key to an outside door to get up to his corral, Virgil said to Train. She turned from her computer. He had a key, no question about that, Train said. We don't know who gave it to him. Of course, it's possible that somebody with a key let him in. I talked to an assistant at the library who says she saw him once very shortly after the library opened coming out of his corral. Not to say that he couldn't have been waiting outside and got in the minute it opened, but she had the impression that he might have slept in the library. Doesn't know for sure. I originally thought he must have been killed after 6:15, the last time we can locate his phone. But now? She pressed her hands to the side of her face, thinking about it, and Virgil asked, What? I keep reminding myself. I know where the cell phone was, Train said. I'm not 100% sure where Quill was, that he was with the phone. The cell wasn't with the body, and neither were the computer nor his keys. We know he kept his house and his office keys on his car fob. He was driving a BMW that night, the BMW that was found in the parking lot. If Verizon can track phones when they're turned off, they can if the battery isn't pulled. Then what happened when it disappeared? He took the battery out. That would be one way, but there are a couple of others. You can buy cases that shield phones from electromagnetic radiation. Maybe he had one. Or the killer did. Virgil said, yup, or the killer did. It's possible he was killed at midnight and the subsequent tracks were the killers. It's also possible that Quill had a phone shield case, met somebody at the library, dropped his phone in the case so he couldn't be tracked, spent the night somewhere, maybe with a woman, then back to the library the next morning and was killed there. None of his lab's associates ever saw such a case. If he was deliberately blocking his phone at times, he might have kept it a secret. The Verizon records don't show any previous instances, though. Then if the phone was shielded, it must likely the killer who did it, Virgil said. You can make that argument. If that's right, Quill was most likely killed at midnight. But then the killer would have to have had Quill's access code because it popped up again the next morning. All this only applies if Quill's phone had a keypad code or maybe a fingerprint code. He did have a code and he kept it secret, Train said. We know that from his wives, and he hadn't changed phones since the second divorce. If he kept it secret from his wives, is it possible he was having an affair? Virgil asked. Patronizing hookers? It's possible, and I've already asked that question, Train said. Nobody knows of such history. He apparently was sexually straight. His wives agreed that he was always sexually active and even a little rough, but he wasn't driven by sex. He was driven by his research. Rough? How rough? Virgil asked. Violent? She shook her head. No, nothing like that. Muscly. He manipulated them enough that they sometimes had bruises, but none of them said they didn't like it. He was a strong guy then. Not a bodybuilder or a weightlifter, but 3 times a week at the gym, doing a full circuit, working hard at it. He owned a Peloton bike. It's at his house, and the Peloton records show he worked out almost every day for exactly half an hour, but heavily. He was in good shape. No, he was in great shape. Yet, no signs that he resisted the killer. The killer hit him from behind, Train said. He never saw it coming. The murder weapon was unknown. People who'd spoken to Quill at his library corral said Quill kept a large and powerful laptop computer there. The computer was missing, but Train had learned from credit card records that Quill had spent more than $12,000 on a high-end laptop, a DreamBook Power P87, the year before. She found a similar computer with an identical case, and the medical examiner had confirmed that a corner of it could have done the damage to Quill's skull, but Train didn't have the actual laptop, so that was also uncertain. Virgil asked Train, is it possible that there was something on his computer or phone that somebody was desperate to get? She shrugged. Who knows? I've asked the question and nobody can think of what it might be. He was a research scientist, but not a loner. There are extensive notes of everything done in the lab. This laptop, we know Quill wasn't a gamer. He didn't play video games. This thing had fast processors and a lot of storage and would work well with virtual reality. His top assistant said you might use it to display or manipulate MRI images. Yet, he didn't know why Quill would try to hide that, what he'd be doing with it in a study corral. They had plenty of computer power in the lab. Still, He had a huge amount of power there. He must have been using it for something. Maybe he screwed something up with a patient and wanted to keep the images where only he could see them. That had occurred to me too. While there is a lawsuit involving one of his patients, a suicide, I don't see anything there. Virgil, this is something I've been struggling with. Thinking he might have a secret life of some kind, but all of his work is very public. I mean, it's all done as a team. When surgery is involved, he doesn't do it, a team of surgeons does. I cannot for the life of me find anything in his professional life that he'd want to hide. Okay, one other thing. That computer is fairly rare. I've been watching the local Craigslist and eBays and Googling laptops for sale, and it hasn't shown up on any of that. It could be in the river. Virgil finished taking notes at 3 o'clock. Train had been coming and going while he worked, and when he kicked back from the computer, she was coming through the doorway with a paper cup full of coffee. Finished? Not really. I need to think about it all. You get any vibrations from anyone? I got vibrations from a lot of people. Quill was highly respected, but not much liked, Train said. A couple of people hinted that he wasn't particularly generous with giving others credit for scientific papers. That's a big deal for young job-hunting scientists. His ex-wives didn't like him either. I asked them why, and they said he was arrogant, cold, and mean. Everything but violent. He had a child with his first wife, a daughter who also didn't like him much. Although he supported her and his first wife quite adequately for more than 20 years until his death. His daughter goes to St. Thomas. She's pretty much a slacker, a C to B student, though her mother says she's bright enough. She doesn't want to work, that's all. Doesn't want to work ever. Does she inherit anything outside that trust? Nope. She gets a trust fund payout until she's 30, enough to pay college tuition through to a PhD if that's what she wants, and to live in a decent apartment and eat. Then it ends. She gets nothing more in the will. Of course, if he lived, he could have changed that. How old is she now? Virgil asked. 19. I interviewed her. She wasn't too upset about him getting killed, Train said. He wasn't present as a father, only his money was. I gotta say, my impression was that she's way too lazy to actually kill somebody, and she's got a solid alibi for a whole time span when Quill was killed. Quill, on some level, seems to have been successful with women. Maybe girlfriends? Jealousy? Not finding it. Hasn't dated recently as far as I've been able to determine. But maybe. I'm still looking. Nobody's come forward. His wife and his exes say he was incredibly smart, which was why they were attracted. And of course, he had family money, quite a bit of it. Money's often attractive in a man. I wouldn't know. I've had to rely on my good looks and personal charm, Virgil said. She gave him the stink eye, unsure whether he was joking or not, and Virgil said, "You've got to get used to my sense of humor." She said, "I talked to Lucas. He said you weren't a terrible guy, most of the time. Nothing like Hitler anyway. I was supposed to remind you to keep your hands off his daughter." That's a Davenport joke, Virgil said. I got the impression that it was 90% joke and 10% death threat, Train said. Yeah, that's about right, Virgil said. So, in 500 words or less, tell me what you figured out. Won't take 500 words. He was killed in the corral. He must have trusted the killer because he turned his back to him in a closed space. The killer almost had to be inside the corral with him. If it was a him, it might not have been because the corral would be crowded with two men in it. If the killer is a her, she's strong. Is it the woman he was with? Where was I? I've tried lifting a similar laptop over my head quickly and then swing it down hard enough to kill. I can do it, but 12 pounds overhead, chopping down, accelerated, doing it fast enough that Quill wouldn't see it coming, it's harder than you think. Okay. The autopsy gave me nothing more than the cause of death. He had no alcohol or any trace of drugs in his system, nothing under the fingernails or on his clothes, or no reason there should be. He obviously didn't resist. And no DNA. Okay, Virgil scrolled down the computer screen, tapped the screen. You got all these NCIC files on a guy named Boyd Nash. What's that about? Nash is I guess a scientist would say he's a dirtbag. I don't understand all the details, but he's some kind of scientific predator, and he has some contact with Quill. Predator? Yeah, he looks for new research that he can get some details on. Then he goes to his law firm that cooperates with him, conspires with him, I'd say. Anyway, give me some rope here because I don't entirely understand it. They find a graduate student or a low-level technician who knows something about the field that the research involves, and they write up a description of work, and then they file for a patent. When the original company or laboratory tries to use their own research, the law firm files for a patent violation. It's technical and complicated enough that the courts don't usually understand what's going on. Sometimes Nash wins, sometimes he loses. But if he wins, he can get a substantial settlement because fighting the court's judgment can cost more than the settlement. The law firm gets a third, of course, but Nash can still get out with tens of thousands of dollars. In other words, he steals research, pretends it's his, or belongs to someone he's working with, and uses a court decision to extort a settlement from the good guys? Yep, that's about it, Train said. You eliminated Nash as a suspect? Not completely, but there seem to be better leads, Train said. The night that Quill disappeared, Nash was in Rochester. He checked into the Doubletree Hotel for a convention. It's in the notes, something like the American Institution for Medical Technology. I talked to him. He gave me names of people he spoke to there, both that night and on Saturday and on Sunday when the convention ended. I called those people and it all checked out. He had an American Express receipt for the hotel for both nights, Friday and Saturday. It's only about an hour and a half each way. He could have been down there until 10 o'clock. I know. I worked through all of that, Train said. It seems unlikely. It's the kind of convention he'd go to for the contacts he needs. And why would he think he needed an elaborate alibi? He couldn't have known Quill would be at the library at midnight. And how would he have gotten in the library? A lot of moving parts there. All right. Now, tell me about this big feud that Quill was involved in. Oh my God, Train said. You ever get in one of those situations where somebody's yelling at you and you feel like your sinuses are getting jammed up by the sheer bullshit? All the time. That's my life story, Virgil said. What's going on? A woman named Catherine Green, Train said, a newly tenured professor in the University Department of Cultural Science, had written a well-received book entitled Cultural Medicine, which argued that medicine which worked well in the West might not work so well in other cultures, or what she called microcultures. In a particular controversial passage, she suggested that families in Marin County, California, and Clark County, Washington, had developed their own microcultures that rejected the Western imperatives of childhood vaccination. The Marin and the Clark multicultures' emphasis on the natural, robust lifestyle would likely prove as effective as vaccinations, Green said, possibly more so. That started people screaming, Train said, because it seemed to offer support for the anti-vaccination movement, which mostly consisted of uncertified crazies. The book made it onto the New York Times bestseller list, and Green, after making a 3-week tour in support of cells, returned to home ground at the university where she was invited to give a lecture at the Kauffman Memorial Union. I've seen a video, Train said. About halfway through, several people started booing. That started a bunch of arguments, and people in the audience started pushing one another around. There were a couple of campus cops there, and they got everybody back in their seats, and Green managed to finish the lecture. Then Quill got up and said her book was ignorant, unscholarly, uninformed, and a bunch of other stuff. Green has a reputation herself. She likes to fight. It seems like she lives for controversy. She called him rude, cultural illiterate, a racist, and a few other things. And he called her a silly twat. Yelled it, actually, Train said. That set things off again, and they had to call more cops because it got out of hand, a small riot. A graduate student got hauled off to jail and was charged with assault because he hit another guy with a chair. Did it break like they do on TV? Virgil asked. No, Train said, a trifle impatiently. Anyway, Green tried to get Quill fired for sexism, filed against him with the Title 11 committee, the word twat. Quill insisted that he called her a silly twat, not twat. He was lying because he did call her a twat. It was plain as day on the video, but there was no way the U was going to fire or even censor Quill. He was way too important. A week or so after Green's lecture, Quill and 3 professors from the medical school held an open seminar at the Mayo Auditorium to discuss the wrong-headedness of Green's book and to question the very existence of the Department of Cultural Science, which, according to flyers posted in the medical school, advocated witchcraft versus medicine. Well, you can guess what happened. Green showed up with staff and students from the cultural science, and they had another riot on their hands. Train said, it's been pretty much open warfare since then. Quill proposed eliminating the cultural science department entirely. It's hard to get rid of tenured professors, but if their department is abolished, well, they don't have jobs. Then everybody in cultural science is a suspect. Yeah, Train said, that would be 18 faculty and graduate assistants and a support staff and a large but unknown number of students. Sounds like you've come down on Quill's side of this thing, Virgil ventured. You know, intellectually? Of course I have, Train said. I wouldn't say it on television, but the green people, the cultural science people, are a bunch of Fruit Loops. Virgil leaned back in his chair, put his boots up on the desk, and said, I don't know. I feel the great karmic twang might favor Greenites. I'll start there. Find this Catherine Green. Train rubbed her face with both hands. Karmic twang? Oh my God, he said karmic twang. You could probably go undercover with cultural science. They'd love that t-shirt. From the other side of the cubicle wall, the cop, who by now finished his tuna fish sandwich, said, I thought he said karmic wang. Train said, shut up. Then said to Virgil, I'll get you a phone number. I'd like to go through Quill's house this evening, if it's not sealed up, Virgil said. I've got the key. I can meet you there after dinner, like 7 o'clock. That's good. Tuna Fish said, you ought to tell Karmic Wayne that Green is quite the hottie. Train again said, shut up. And to Virgil said, I guess she is, but that's irrelevant. Tuna Fish Sandwich said, no, it's not. The hottest sex is always between two people who don't like each other. That's why feminists date drug dealers or drummers at some point in their lives. In your situation, you got the handsome, brilliant, rich, and probably horny divorcing professor on one side and the best-selling academic unmarried hottie on the other. Did you ever look at her boobies? Think there might be sparks? Thank you, Dr. Freud. You're welcome. It's better than anything you've come up with, Tuna Fish said. Virgil, give me the number for Green. Train gave him the number and asked, how are we going to do this, you and me? How about if I work it as kind of like an assistant or intern, Virgil suggested, on my own, because there's no point in both of us standing around looking at the same guy. You do your thing, I do mine, and we meet every morning and again every night until we get the killer. I'm happy you're so sanguine about getting him. We had a 50% clearance rate on murders last year. If we don't do better, Knox going to be the new lieutenant guarding the landfill. I'll be the sergeant in charge of the sloppy diaper dump. Aw, we'll get him, Virgil said. If we don't, I got an extra pair of barn boots I can give you. You know, for the diapers. And that's the end of chapter 3. Like I said, I'm going to give it to chapter 5 to see if it's going to go anywhere. If not, bye-bye and on to the next one. So with that being said, I shall see you in the next chapter. Bye for now.